Hello to everyone. Good afternoon. How are you? Have you all had enough to eat? Let's now feed other things, our bodies with new information. And talking of information, I will just quickly tell you something here. People have been asking me, what name do we use? What's the nomenclature? So we know that terms are still being used in society that shouldn't be used anymore. They're out of date, like a handicapped person or a special person. And the phrase portador de deficiência in Portuguese is not worth using because it talks about carrying a disability, and it's not something we carry and decide whether to have it or not. So we say a person with disability because first and foremost we have a person here and not just a disability, because otherwise the person becomes invisible. So we need to make them protagonists as people who can relate to spaces and socially with other people. So it's a person with a disability. And when we talk about special needs, that's also not appropriate, because how do we decide whether a person has a special need? And we could say that I'm sure that everybody has at least one special need, as it were. And when we talk about needs, I come from Bahia, and in Salvador, when we talk about someone who's special, is the person who pays for your food at the end of your shift. So please don't take away my ability to find a special person like that. We just need to find acarajé, that Bahian dish, somewhere near here. So good afternoon to you. And this is the third and final day, unfortunately, of this fourth edition of the Global Conference on Education at Sesc RJ. I am Marcelo Zig, and I'm very pleased to be here with you in this final part. So now we're going to be looking at the book about inclusion and social rights in the third sector. So we're going to ask the doctor in education from the Federal University of Rio rather. We're going to ask her anyway to talk a bit more about who she is and what she does. The adjunct coordinator of the Nucleus on Special Research and Education, the president of the Incluir Institute, and also the author of award-winning books on this topic from the Jabuti Award, Karina Alves. So she's not here alone. So we're going to call on two other people to come here. Alana Marcelo, who is the supervisor of Karina's thesis, which then resulted in this book that she's holding up in front of you. And the other person we've already got to know this morning from Portugal's National Education Council, Professor David. Over to you. Good afternoon to you. So as Ziggy said, my name is Karina Alves. I'll do my audio description. I'm a white-skinned woman with brown eyes. I've got my hair tied back. I'm using an orange blouse and a dress which is very colorful. So I've asked these people here with me. Because the work we do is never done alone. Always many people take part in our work, and so this book here is the result of my doctoral thesis, and my supervisor was Alain Damasceno, who's also a dear friend of mine and an inspiration to me and has taught me a lot. Within the private-public partnership, I have worked a lot in different NGOs here in Brazil, fighting for human rights and inclusion, social inclusion for everyone. So it was as a result of many conversations with Alan that I could understand the best pathways. Well, maybe not the best ones, but we hope they are, in order to implement and carry out social projects within education, sport, leisure, and culture. And here to my right, David Rodrigues, a professor from Portugal, who's also worked in NGOs. There you call them a different name, don't you? Associations. So we're here at this conference, and there are lots of different names. In the US, it was NGO. And originally, NGOs were sort of more concerned with giving assistance and welfare, and we know that in Europe, 13% of people work within the third sector. And in the observatory of the third sector here in Brazil, we know that there are 815,000 NGOs. So it shows the huge gap in that public authorities have in acting within society, because we obviously have to fill the gaps where they don't operate. So this private-public partnership is important, and I brought a mini documentary here to show you, because I think the images help you understand the projects, the territories where we work. We're all over Brazil in the 5 geopolitical regions. And I think it's important to recognize the work of the private sector, because we wouldn't be able to do any of the work that we do if we didn't have the private sector on our side. So let's show you the video. So my name's Karina Alves. I'm finishing 3 years as a researcher on a postgraduate program about contemporary contexts and popular demands at the Federal University, the UFF University. My supervisor was Alain Damasceno, about inclusion and social directors within the public-private partnership. And here is my doctoral thesis, which I am very happy to share with you. Instituting experiences for the affirmation of humanity. So I analyzed and detailed a lot in these 186 pages of my thesis. So it's important to remember that the critical theory of society, which illuminates our research, was done by a German philosopher, sociologist from Frankfurt. And he was fundamental for my particular story. I was born 42 years ago in São João de Meriti, in Greater Rio, which is like a supporting actor to everything that I found important within my life. I was included and shared my life, shared my mother's womb rather with my twin sister. And this was important for me in terms of my analysis and my work, trying to make society less cruel and barbaric. So this concept happens when schools can finally free themselves of the taboos that are related to students. So as a result of that, so does education emancipate or alienate people? Can our problems be resolved with the solutions from the past? How can we include individuals who are excluded by hate, violence, and barbarity? Theodor Adorno said that while we continue repeating barbarities, it will cover the whole of our lives. So philosophical approaches are important. And according to my supervisor, inclusion is a cultural movement and has in mind the objective of making society and education more democratic. We see here in Brazil there's been a deterioration in the dignity of Brazilian people, especially those in marginalized districts. Inclusion happens when children are present in the classroom, because it has to be for everybody. In order to do this, it has to respect human differences. The third sector ends up not only absorbing the needs of these people, but also their hopes and expectations in various contexts. We can also talk about two important people to our work, Paulo Freire, the educator, who fought against the continuous injustices of society, and postures that we think are ethical and political are vital to be able to help raise people who live below the poverty line. And our indignation with those people who have to live there help us to seek freedom. It's important to say that from 2001 to 2020, according to the Digital Library of Brazilian Dissertations and Theses, there are a number of theses on the third sector. And these theses have shown us the necessity of improving society within this area. We have already reached more than 65,000 people through the third sector in sport, culture, and leisure. So to combat barbarity, education has to be not just horizontal, but it also needs to infuse cultural practices and public policies so that the dominant structures can open their doors to everybody, because in the past they have oppressed us, and we need them to be more present, human, and frequent. So, as we've noticed, practice in academia, practice influences theory, theory influences practice, and then the practice then influences theory again. So even though the way we approach these questions might be still limited, what we're talking about is a social problem and a political problem that is deep-rooted within Brazil. And the asymmetry of Brazilian society affects communities where our projects are carried out. My research will not stop here, but will carry on looking and analyzing other areas where we could improve. But we know it is possible to make improvements through this public-private partnership in favor of these people who live in vulnerable situations, especially people with disabilities.
Well, I think the video speaks for itself. But this is what we should think about. The perspective of this critical Frankfurt theory. And this perspective talks about how education is for liberating people. The perspectives of our social projects are related to educating people, so we always involve sports and arts and culture. So we have accessible literature. We have an ongoing project that's well diffused in Brazil. We also do sports activities all over the country, because our idea is to work with young people and children. We want to include people with disabilities, but we want to have everyone involved. That includes women who are the mothers of these young people. And a lot of these mothers, when they come to us, they've been abandoned by their husbands, because when they find out that their children have some kind of disability, the husband disappears. So in the past, we wouldn't do anything with these women. But then I began to understand throughout time what inclusion meant and how we could actually reach everyone. Because basically these women would be waiting for their children to leave class, and we began to listen to these women. We began to understand what they needed. And so we began to understand that there is an issue related to listening. There's a psychiatric issue, psychological issues. So we began to include these issues of femininity and gender issues. We also began to include indigenous issues in our work. And I see a colleague here, present here in the auditorium, that works with that. So, you know, we're taking literature, arts, and sports to these different communities. And I think that's what it's about. I think we should think about all of these issues. And like I said, the research project hasn't ended, and maybe a lot of different things will come out of it. And I think I will spend the rest of my life talking about these kinds of social issues, because I think all of this work is a call so that we may all work to ensure social rights. And it's great to be able to do this with other people and working in these public-private partnerships. And it's an honor for me to be able to talk about women and peripheral women. Today I head a few institutes, because a single institute doesn't solve all of these issues, and that's why we began to increase the number of institutes in the third sector. We began to do this judicially so as to meet the demands of a large segment of our population, a segment that does not have assistance and that needs things to be done for them, different activities. And it's important for us to pay attention to the issues faced by these people. These people need our help. They have things to say, they have needs. So these are the perspectives that we've been bringing to these fora. Children have the right to have access to education, and this education should be of a good quality. And these people need to be seen as subjects that have rights instead of just another person in the classroom. And now I will give you guys the floor, or else, you know, I won't stop. Good afternoon to everyone. Now I'm speaking away from the microphones, so I can, so that you can locate where I am. Because again, with the microphone, the sound comes from the speakers, and people who have visual impairments are unable to locate me. So I'm a white person with short brown hair. I have a beard. I have brown eyes. I'm using black framed glasses. I'm using a white shirt, long sleeve shirt, but you can see that because I have a gray jacket on top, and I'm also wearing gray pants. So it's a pleasure to be here with Karina and Professor Davi Rodrigues at this important moment in relation to human development. So this book that comes from Karina's PhD thesis is an enormous investment for everyone who's interested in reading it, because it brings a different perspective and a different reality that sometimes we have a hard time understanding. Is it possible? I think that's a question we have to keep asking ourselves. Is it possible to think about a more inclusive world or a more democratic world? Can we think about a more welcoming and humanized school? We want to have different ideas about how to deal with a reality. If we can dichotomize these issues, can we think pragmatically and empirically about the possibility of building a more inclusive society, a more inclusive education, and a more inclusive school? And can we do this in a scenario such as ours, the Brazilian scenario, that has a lot of inequality? These last few days, in some social network, I was reading about how most of the wealth in this country are concentrated in the hands of maybe half a dozen people. When we say that, we're saying that we've got billionaires in this country and that there's an enormous amount of inequality in Brazil. This is a country of continental dimensions with more than 200 million inhabitants. And so it's a country that presents quite a few challenges. I think that Karina's research is not restricted to just a few critical, theoretical considerations. She used a perspective to understand the context in which her NGO works. Her research project brings us some possibilities of thinking about how to face all of the difficulties we're facing in all of these different contexts in our society. In researching inclusion in education for the past 2 decades, I can say a few things. I see a lot of young people here. I see high school students amongst us, and I can see some teachers in training that soon will be working in schools and working with children. And I can say that the challenges are enormous. We have to think about an education which considers itself inclusive, but then we have to ask ourselves, who fits in that inclusiveness? Who is an inclusive school for? So yesterday there was some celebration related to the birth of Darcy Ribeiro, I think. And I remember that I saw something about that. And Darcy Ribeiro said that the Brazilian education is a project. So who does that interest? Who is interested in an education which is non-liberating and non-democratic? What about schools that are supposed to be more democratic and that propose models that are not correct models? For example, should the medical field inform schools how to deal with disabled children? We have a lot of bills in Congress that are being voted on right now, and these bills, they don't give teachers the freedom. They want to impose the opinions of doctors on how things are run in schools. But a good teacher, as Paulo Freire would say, are the teachers that learn the way the student learns so that they can teach these children. So according to this perspective, I think that Karina's research project, I believe that Karina's research project brings us a lot of different issues, and I'm sure that our professor here also brings us some important issues. And I think that we should consider all of this without Eurocentrism. We should have more inclusive possibilities in Brazil. And I think public-private partnerships can be positive for this. No, but people have demands, and we have to understand these demands when they are with us. So people with disabilities are here, and they have existential demands. So we can't wait for a moment where we can build a strong enough state to help these people. So what are we doing to then? Should we not ignore these people's rights? I think we should think about that. I know that a lot of people are resistant to the idea of public-private partnerships, but I believe in existential demands. People are here with us and they have their demands, and we need to help them. So students are in the classroom, they have disabilities, and so inclusiveness to me is supposed to help everyone. So we have to try to allow these people to reach their potential. That's what we need to do. So we've got a lot of challenges, but there are possibilities. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. There's one thing that I'd like to say to Professor Aliã. I didn't say anything, but, doctors are supposed to go to schools to see what's happening. And then teachers should also go to the emergency room to have a better understanding of what's going on in the medical field. I think if we try and improve things, we're actually going to make them worse. I think that the work that was done by Karina shows us that inclusion isn't something that has been balkanized. Inclusion is basically a social value, and it's a social value that's incompatible with racism and xenophobia and with inequality. And because it's a social value, it's a human value. And that can be translated into activities in schools and in the hospitals and at home. And so Karina's book calls our attention to the sociological and holistic aspect of inclusion. It basically says that we are all required to pay attention to other people and caring for other people. So we need to help others. And when Karina talks about accessible literature and other projects, what we realized is that we cannot believe that inclusion is something that we have or that we are. It's something that's transversal in society. I think that's the greatest lesson that we get of Karina's book. Now, I met Karina in Portugal, and I'm like, wow, what a woman. I would listen to her. I saw the way she would speak enthusiastically about these issues. And I was like, what an incredible woman. And so she asked me to write the preface of her book. And I was really happy to do it. I'm very proud of having taken part in your project. So your book, it expands our horizons. It allows us to see society in another way. So, you know, we were very established in our ways of thinking in relation to inclusiveness, but actually these issues go much further. So we really have to think about inclusion as a social value. It's a human duty. So that's what you tell people in your book. So thank you very much, Karina, for inviting us, and thank you for publishing your book.
Thank you. And I'd also like to thank the Sesc organization. I know that we're running out of time, but I'd like to just close here with some words here. And here's a poem that I did for this afternoon. How much does a dream cost? It always costs something. Very often it costs quite a lot. And then sometimes other dreams cost us as well. My heart is beating. How much more do we need to go through? How many more times will a child not get to school? How long will our hope have to wait? How many dreams of ours will go moldy? We know that times can be difficult to become perfect, but barbarity should not be here to frighten us. Human rights and social rights are on the shelf. We need to sharpen our tools to be able to emancipate education. So many wrong things have been said that I have heard. Things by parties that I'd never heard before. Even though my poor logic still insists on this, for students to be the protagonists and the professors, the teachers, to be the questioners. They've messed with education for my people who have suffered so much, but I will say that this fight continues. This phobia will not kill us. Non-homogeneous voices will manifest themselves. Is that it? Have you been chucked off stage? Oh, it appears we haven't got enough time, but thank you. It was wonderful. I'm really excited to read this book and understand better what you're proposing, so that we have access to new perspectives. So that we can improve as a society. So thank you, Karine, Dr. Alain, and Professor David. So let's continue now with our afternoon. So let's go to our final round table about intercultural education. So I'm going to call upon the doctor in social sciences from the University of the Basque Country, with 30 years of experience researching about the original inhabitants of Latin America, Alicia Fernanda Sagüés Silva, also the professor, doctor of social sciences and holder of a fellowship by UNESCO on higher education and indigenous people and Afro-descendants in Latin America, Anny Ocoró Loango, and finally an indigenous woman from the Guajajara people, an arts educator, activist, feminist, representative and researcher about indigenous peoples and about contemporary residency, Aliã, Wamiri. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours. So Aliã Wamiri is off mic, but I understand that she is now translating what she said in Guajajara. But the interpreters can't translate what she's saying because she is not using her microphone. Good afternoon to all of you. So let's start by having a song from my original language, which is Tupi-Guarani. It's a song about expanding your conscience, so that we can enter places that we can't even imagine we could enter. So I'm going to ask if you can, I'm going to ask my colleagues here if you can help me with this song, which is over 3,000 years old. So who's going to speak first? Me? Okay. So we've got some images, and we are an oral tradition people, which is a wonderful tool, which is communication using our language, and talking about language in a wide sense, in feeling, looking, and expanding. So do I click on this green button? Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. So as I said, I'm from a oral tradition people, but I've got some images here which will help with this mediation. Are you okay over there? Can you see? So I have my language and my identity as an indigenous woman through existence and resistance. I'm not a technological person, so please tell me where I have to point this thing to. I am more interested in the creation and invention of things of the mind. Maybe you could help us by... Oh, and sometimes technology leaves us. So resisting through the language memories and also recreating languages, because we know that Brazil is a continental-sized country, and before these people who didn't live here came, we had lots of different languages, and one of those languages and the nomenclature we use was Pindorama, which is the region of the palm trees in my language, Tupi-Guarani. Our country is multilingual. We speak 274 original languages in terms of the indigenous people here in Brazil. And this is the ones that weren't brought by peoples who came here, those people who came to exploit us, and those who came here enslaved. So even well before that, we were already very multilingual, and our plurality in terms of language allowed us the possibility to construct a varied society, offering us a lot of meaning through our existence and also a way of reading the world. So here in Brazil, we have 305 different ethnicities who are original inhabitants of Brazil. There are 1.7 million indigenous people in Brazil, which is about 0.83% of the population, according to the last census, which was done in 2022. When the Portuguese arrived here, which turned into Brazil in 1500, they found lots of different peoples here. So around 5 million people lived here, and most of them lived along the coast. So this research shows us and emphasizes ever more that original inhabitants who have always lived here are very diverse. They come from very different places and very different types of existence. So talking about our people and our language, this is my mum here in this photo. She's 74 years old, Marina Guajajara, and she's a leader of an indigenous village in Piauí. We're the Guajajara people, and that means the owners of headdresses. And also, tenetejara is another word which means that we are true human beings. So we don't care whether we've got a car or a bridge or a house or whatever, or whether we're going to manage to win millions of euros on the stock market. But it means that our importance, what is important for us is collaboration and exchange. So we have a little dish called cuia, which means giving a donation to somebody else. So we're talking about collaboration, and this particular dish never comes back empty. It always comes full of things, full of ideas of how we can organize ourselves within the world. And the indigenous peoples from Guajajara live in Maranhão state near the Amazon, and also within the central northern region of Piauí state. And within Piauí state, we live in Teresina, where there's a village called Ucaye. And in this village, we have leaflets to help us maintain our original language, Tupi-Guarani. So we exist and resist through our language and through education and through creating new knowledge. We're a people of oral history and oral tradition, and we use that to help strengthen our ancestral languages and also help us with our publications in terms of leaflets and books. And this space here is within our village, which is in the center of the city. It's in the eastern part of the city. And it's a small space because we are indigenous people living in an urban context. So we live in a big terrain with lots of different houses usually. But in this particular village, we've got schools where people talk about our sacred myths and stories. And this was one of the first schools to be part of Sesc in Piauí. So even though we're in the middle of the city, we carry on existing because we help maintain nature. We work with toys, with graffiti and painting, reading, and lots of different experiences. And so within the village, we have schools, culture, and sustainability in partnership with Sesc. And they have a project to know the wealth of indigenous culture, and our children learn about how we plant corn and the life cycle of the seed, because we are all seeds effectively, and we're all going to grow and become something to help feed other people. So we're like trees. So the roots are the elderly people in the village, and then the trunk is like the encounter between the different, the two genders, and then the branches are the children, and then the leaves are from the shamans. And then eventually those fruit will eventually fall on the ground and create another tree through the seeds. And these images here are of our classes. Because we've got such a small space, we have to take pictures of the different classes, and in the middle you can see there are some children in a hammock, and this is a hammock made by our Guajajara people. And this is our, also, as well as being our hammock, it's our social network, because we look at each other.
This is our social network, or social hammock, because this involves looking at other people's eyes and being more in contact with our colleagues. So here, we're not necessarily looking or relating to our colleagues through screens. Here, we're actually feeling our people. We also have a lot of indigenous works and artworks, and we've got instruments, and these children here can play with all of this. We've got food that we plant. Here I'm telling a story. And children, they understand there are a lot of things that they interact with. They leave the whiteboard in the classroom and the tablet, and they end up drawing on the dress of the person telling them stories. And they work with these threads which are involved with the knowledge networks. And we're going to be talking about the animals we know and the plants we know. And we speak the Tupi-Guarani language, but we also translate all of this to Portuguese. So here we have an example of the kinds of activities that we do. So our classroom, our village left our area, and now we can actually go all around the world. We can show people that, for example, the dress is a support mechanism for presentations. So here we have a presentation that we did in Sesc in Rio de Janeiro. As you can see, there are teenagers, and we were working with technology. So here they could interact with these dresses, which were people who were telling stories. Here you can see educators of the Sesc network. On the right-hand side, you can see the teachers of the Rio de Janeiro state at Sesc. And what they're doing is they are learning about their symbols. Before, they only knew about zodiac symbols, but now here you can see them understanding or getting to know the symbols of animals. And these teachers really felt powerful. One of them understood that she had the joy of the parrot. The other one understood that she had the poison of the snake, which is also a cure. And on the left-hand side, you can see another kind of supporting mechanism. And it's a piece of plastic. And so here, the teachers start talking about the importance of the classroom. They do this by saying things in Portuguese, and then the students find out what these words are in Tupi-Guarani. So this is our pride and joy. After the urban village, the state of Piauí said that they were going to create the first indigenous school in Piauí. This would be a multilingual school where they would speak 5 languages: Portuguese, English, Spanish, the language of the Arau people of Venezuela, and the Tupi-Guarani language of the Guajajara people. So here, this is a classroom for educating adults and children. So you can see that the description of the classroom is in different languages. So the language used here is Okaka Onananoku, which means house of knowledge. And this house of knowledge is built by these people. We're talking about people who were arriving in Brazil after having been expelled from their homes. So then the state of Piauí today welcomes different indigenous people, both the original inhabitants of the region and also indigenous people that were expelled from their home countries. Here you can see my sister. She looks like me, and she's the principal at the school, because our school is comprised of indigenous people. So here we have also a coordinator. And I would like to conclude with Daniel Mudurunku's words. He was a teacher of mine. And what he said was the following: for us, indigenous people, memory is updated by the sound of the words of our grandparents. This gives meaning to the present, and we don't lose touch with their friends. Understanding is feeding hope. So, okatu, good energy to all of you. And now, who do I give the floor to? Okay, Alicia. Good afternoon. Okay, so first I'm going to do my audio description. The interpreters cannot translate because she's not speaking on the microphone. The interpreters cannot interpret because she's not speaking on the microphone. So I speak Portuñol, which is a mixture between Portuguese and Spanish. And unfortunately, I got a little bit of a cold. So I live in the field in a rural area. But a friend of mine gave me some cough drops, so hopefully I'll be able to talk. So first of all, I'd like to thank Sesc for inviting me to talk here. It's an enormous honor for me to be here with all of you, talking about my experience and the experience of people who taught me. Now, Jacqueline is the one who's responsible for me being here. So thank you, Jacqueline, for proposing my name. So Jacqueline went to OIP, which is the International Association of Intercorporality and Inclusion and Pedagogical Innovation. So the first person who invited me to this association was Mônica Pereira dos Santos. And she lives in my heart. She unfortunately is having some health issues, but she lives in my heart. So, I would like to start with something that I learned from the original inhabitants or the indigenous peoples of the southern part of South America, especially the Mapuche people. And they say that when you go to speak somewhere, you have to introduce yourself. So, who are you? Where do you come from? What are you bringing to other people? So, I'm going to give a small introduction to who I am, regarding who I am. So, my father's mother, when she was 13 years old, she migrated from the north of Spain by herself to the south of Argentina. And she did that because she was going hungry. So she worked with indigenous people. She used to call them Indians. So she worked with indigenous people who lived in her land. But they were almost slaves. Now, because she was a woman and because she was an immigrant, it was almost like she was a slave as well. But she inspired a lot of admiration in me for these people, because she told me, you know, these people live in their original lands, and they were almost slaves. Whereas, you know, she was coming from a different country to this country, and she was being treated better than these people who had always been living there. So this really informed me regarding certain considerations. Now, my mother, she was the child of workers who were pretty much illiterate, and she became a special conductor. She became one of the first special conductors, and she worked at a special school. So she was basically self-taught as a teacher, because at that time there was no special training. She would tell me, you know, children are children and they need education. So my mother and father were workers, and they couldn't leave my brothers and I with anyone. I was the youngest child in the family, so I would go to school and then I would go to my mother's school. So her school was located in a hospital for boys. And you know, I would play with all of the different boys. There were boys without legs, boys without arms. They had problems of all kinds. So, but they were children, just like me.
Todos, ninguém podia fazer isso. Não fazíamos. Muitos deles não podiam, mas eu não fazia por obedecer.
So, with them, I learned that we're all people, and that diversity is part of who we are, in all senses of the word. So when I was 10 years old, I started to study the arts through a system that they had there in the Rio de la Plata. And then I got a degree in fine arts. And now that I'm going to turn 58, I can say that, you know, I've been studying arts for the past 48 years. And within the arts, I studied the history of art, because I understood that through the sensibility that art inspires in all of us, I could be closer to the indigenous peoples that I admired so much. I believe that I could get to know those people that my grandmother would tell me about. But, you know, there was no way that these stories could work out, because the indigenous people in Argentina no longer existed, according to the history textbooks. Anyway, so when I turned 19, I went to live with some of them. And basically, I didn't go to study them, the indigenous people. I actually went to learn from them. There's a difference, right? They weren't the subjects of my study. I didn't put them under a microscope. No, I actually wanted to share things with them, and I wanted to learn from them, because I wanted to understand what they represented, how they were represented in the world through that which we call art. And then time went by, and I thought that photographs and writing were not enough for me to describe my experience with them. So I went back to my university where I studied arts, and I tried to do a partnership with somebody who worked on documentaries so that I could communicate everything about these people. And still today, I'm working with the same person.
So we have a presentation here in Spanish, but there's not that much text to be able to understand. So I think you're going to understand. I hope so anyway. So I really like popular art very much. And I think that one of the things that's most interesting is Poetic Action. I don't know if you know what this is. It's a group which is an international group. I think it started in Mexico. And their doctrine is very clear. There's only 8 words here written in capital letters, black letters on a white background, because we always see this in public places, and it needs to make sense. It could be a quote from somebody else, or it could be something that you've made up yourself. But it's got to be anonymous, the way it's written. And there's always things that are very interesting, like this one here. And this is what I'm asking you to do. Open your mind like a parachute. And that's the idea of intercultural education. And so this definition, which is here, it's a utopia. But a thinker called Fernando Birli from Argentina said the following, that how do you create a utopia? You get up, look towards the horizon, and you start walking that way, but you never reach the horizon. You never get to the end. Is that not right? Is it possible to arrive on the horizon? No. So then you carry on walking further. Did you manage to reach the horizon? But what have you done? Okay, you didn't get to the horizon, but you walked forward. And that is what we are doing. It's where we want to get to. And I think that everywhere in the world has intercultural relations. And this is what I try and do in my small spheres, my worlds, in my classroom. That's what I try and do. Reach interculturality. Because but how do we do this, rather? So, I'll explain now. So, from I think it's something that is represented very well from the visual arts, because I'm not an artist, but I think that through the visual arts we can understand diversity of points of view and perspectives and different ways of seeing the universe. That's what it's about. So, but what's a true perspective? We don't know. But the fact is, we all have a point of view, a perspective. And so the perspective is the representation, a 3-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional vision from a specific point of view. But perspective is obviously cultural. It's a cultural construct because in the West, we say that the perspective has a vanishing point. Yes, everything ends up going towards this vanishing point. But in the Orient, the perspective is inverse. So when we look at sketches and so on from the East, it feels like they come towards us. Like everybody seems to be the same size, but they should be smaller because they're further away. But why? It's because our perspective here is the Christian God. He's there in the infinite, and he never arrives, and everyone goes in his direction. But in the East, it's the opposite. The infinite is within us. So all perspectives end up meeting in the observer. And so this representation of space, it doesn't matter how far away they are, they will always be the same size because we're all equal. So everything depends on our point of view, but not of our eyes, but within our head. This is funny. This particular image is difficult to see this, isn't it? But it's also very difficult to open the parachute sometimes. I love this particular author, Eduardo Galeano. I think you'll be able to understand it. So here we have 2 points of view from the same culture, same Western culture. So the scientists say that we are made from atoms, but then there's that's the scientific view, and then there's the artistic one. But then a little bird told me that we're made up of stories. So are we made up of atoms or stories? We're talking about perspectives. And here we have an Italian text from Michelangelo Pistoletto. That's his artistic name. The third paradise. So I took the image of the sign of infinity, because everybody knows that from Western society, and then it became multiplied. So me and you can construct the infinite within us. When we have we, which is noi in Italian, you have an I of infinity there. And it includes nature and humans. Because often we think that these are 2 different things, but we're part of it, nature. But the idea is to break down these distinctions. We need to create something that's bigger. You and I, them and us. But this can create the infinite. And so I work a lot with designing research for people who are studying at university, graduate students. So imagine this again, you and I, we create a we, which is the infinite. Your knowledge and my knowledge give our knowledge, which could be infinite. And what are we doing in Western universities? We say that there's only one knowledge, and there's only one knowledge that's accepted, and that's Western knowledge. And so we're losing the biggest amount of knowledge in the world by excluding the rest. A larger amount, I should say. Okay, so this looks very mathematical, but I'm not very keen on maths. But even the enemy sometimes brings us good things. So maths here has a concept, which is reciprocity, a reciprocal number. And every number has a reciprocal number, which means, we talk about multiplying, don't we? So it means, I think mathematics is an international language, isn't it? But when you multiply a number by its reciprocal number, the answer or the result is always 1. But what is that? So reciprocity creates unity. So when we multiply 2 entities, but there are. But if we multiply, as I said, the number with its reciprocal number, then we always get 1, and that is unity. So we need to transform ourselves into reciprocal cultures so that then we can multiply ourselves or our cultures, add together our culture, our dreams, our feelings, our nightmares, our fears, everything. But we can only do that if we use everybody. So we can multiply ourselves here. There are lots of people here in various ways. So to have a compact unity and a very rich unity, that is how we do it. It's through reciprocity. So I collaborated with many people to do some work, to put into Western scientific terms so that nobody could say to me that they didn't understand what I was saying, because everything has a logic behind it. And in our system of Western thinking, we need to fulfill certain conventions so that our work is recognized, and to create content that will be quoted in universities, in schools, and in training programs. So you all work in universities, and you know that when there's an educational focus on a question for some kind of research, there has to be an epistemological basis to it, which is a mixture of 2 perspectives, which has to be sensitive but also reflexive, and also has to have action, because we can't just talk about this. It also has to then be turned into action. So I'll leave this for you if you want to access it. But the idea here is that we, in this focus of intercultural reciprocal education, it's like another object. We're all subjects, we're all research subjects, but we're also researchers. So, for example, gunpowder has already been made, but we're here in distinct proportions, and so what I try to do is to systematize this idea so that I could use it in the classroom in different contexts. So for architectural research, for creating content for filmmakers, I've used this as well for engineer researchers, very diverse people with different minds, which are kind of wired in different ways. But we can put this into practice in all these contexts. And what do we do with this? With all these characteristics and qualitative methods and so on. Every small world that we create with this is its own case. With this, we can't create a huge theory that's well structured that acts as an umbrella for everybody. You need to end up tailoring it to each individual case according to the diversity in front of you and the what's proposed by the people and the challenges and the dreams of possibilities that this diversity brings to you.
So how do we work with this? How do we put this into practice? Well, first of all, we work with the whole group. However, we don't own the truth. There's something that I heard which I really liked in a course that I took part in. I basically, I started studying arts, like I said, and then there was this group of girls that had classes with this other teacher, and basically these girls wanted the teacher to say the same thing that was written in their textbook. And their teacher came up to me and she said, "Oh, well, Professor Alicia can solve this issue." And she just disappeared. So these girls came up to me with the textbook and they said, teacher, what's this here? Who is this?" And I said, "I don't know. Let's find out." And their faces just went blank. And they were silent. And they had never been in that state before. So we went to class and they remained silent without saying anything. And I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Nothing." But I said, "Well, something's happening. What's going on?" And they said, "Well," I asked them, has no teacher ever told you guys that they didn't know the answer to something? If that's the case, then teachers have been lying to you all their lives, because nobody knows everything and nobody's born knowing everything. The difference between a teacher and a student is that both may not know the answer to a question. However, the teacher will know where to find information about that topic. So I told them, let's research together. So we learned about what they were asking me. And so these students understood that they too did not need to know everything. And that was good for them. So basically, we teachers, we are coordinators, we're motivators, and we are part of a collective learning process. We all have to learn. So we learn by doing research. We also learn through collaboration, and we do this in a contextualized and we do this through our communities. And we do this in a reflective, critical, humble, and respectful manner.
Não, todos têm conhecimento.
Everybody has knowledge. Everybody has a perspective and a point of view. So everybody can contribute, everybody can think, and everybody can share their opinion. That's the idea.
Por isso é importante também essa percepção de muitos povos indígenas que têm que trazer seus ancestros a conversa.
A lot of indigenous people believe that they need to bring their ancestors to the conversation, and that's their perspective. So we need to do all of this with our emotions, our dreams, and our own timelines. And we need to do all of this with conscience or awareness. That is, the alignment of thought, word, emotions, and actions. So if I really believe that to learn I need to contribute, then I will be contributing to learning. And because this is a proposal undergoing construction, then I think we can actually talk more about this. I'm always talking about sharing collaborative thinking. And I always talk about the naturalness of diversity. I say that we have to reach cultural diversity, but this also applies to diversified capacities and the diversity of capacity. It involves different perceptions, sexuality, gender roles, social roles. It involves everyone's stories. That's why interculturality as a strategy, as a pedagogical strategy, is more than just different cultures. We're talking about things, relations between people. The word inclusion is this idea of putting into a little box people that don't actually fit into a box. So we have to try and break the walls of this little box, and we have to share knowledge. We need to have reciprocal knowledge. We need to do this together as a community, as a collective. And we need to spread this practice. If we just do these things within the classroom or within our work teams, then it's like, you know, discovering the Big Bang and not sharing that with anyone. We should share knowledge and we should share our perspectives, because everybody has their own truth, a part of the truth. Everybody has a perception of life. And we all need these different perceptions. Earlier and yesterday, Marcela was asking us this. That is, how can we understand what happened to other people? How can we understand what is happening with wheelchair users if we don't speak to them? What laws can we create? What classes can we have if we don't understand their point of view? What are we going to do if we share information with, for example, the indigenous people, but we don't get their help in elaborating a curriculum?
sabem o sul e o norte. Sem perder que cada é cada
But we need to do all of this, which I just talked about, without losing sight that we are individuals. So we shouldn't lose sight of our individualities.
Essa é a proposta.
So that's the proposal. Now here you also have my email, because I will be leaving this session, and I'm actually going to take a class in the city of Nova Friburgo, and I'm really excited about that. And basically I have to be there early in the morning tomorrow, so that's why I'll have to leave here today. But again, here's my email, and you can send me your questions by email. So write me your questions or comments, and I'll be happy to read what you have to say. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to introduce myself. Good afternoon. My name is Anny Ocoró Loango. I say that I'm from Colombia, I'm from Argentina, but part of my body remains in Brazil. I love Brazilians because Brazilians are important to us. Brazilians are important because of their intellectual, because of what they produce, what they write. And because in Brazil you have people that resist and that have been fighting historically. Now I'm going to do my audio description. I really love this practice. I had never seen it before. So I'm committed to doing it. So I'm a black woman. I'm using a striped shirt, black pants, and green shoes. So thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I would like to thank Sesc. I would like to thank Adriana and her team, and Priscilla. There are quite a few of them. I would like to thank them for their generosity. We are being well taken care of. I would also like to thank Professor Roberto Borges, because it was he who created this connection with Sesc. So I was invited to talk about interculturality in this panel. So I decided to include some things to complement what has already been said. So what do we mean by interculturality? And what's the difference between interculturality and multiculturality? So there are multiculturality and interculturality. Now, multiculturality is a word that's mentioned a lot in Latin America, and it's been used since the 90s, but it comes from an Anglo-Saxon context. That is, when Canada needed to recognize the different ethnicities and the different Francophone and Anglophone groups in the country. So this notion became popularized through the different cultural studies, and eventually this term arrived in Latin America in a problematic context. This was a period when we had a lot of policies to recognize the rights of Black people in the region. We also had a lot of non-liberal policies during that period. So this policy tries to turn this diversity more visible. However, it will leave intact the inequalities related to this kind of diversity. So this word made visible groups which before were invisible. It involves creating rights for these groups, but in Latin America, while this cultural agenda and while this diversity agenda made progress, we were going backwards in terms of the rights of these indigenous people because of these liberal,
So this discourse was highly criticized for that reason. And these new policies ended up making us go backwards in terms of the distribution of resources, and that's very important to remember. And governments and states need to recognize that, especially in Latin America, where the indigenous peoples and Black peoples were silenced. And it's also important to remember that this redistribution needs to be present to be able to leverage policies that advance social justice and not just policies to recognize them. So during the 1990s, interculturality began to question our ideas of multicultural relations, and it was a Latin American idea proposed by indigenous people to say that multiculturality includes all the peoples here, but it didn't change the structures that create inequality and mean that these cultures are undervalued. So this concept was present in studies in the 1950s in Venezuela and Mexico, but it became much more popular in the 90s. Unfortunately, I can't read what I'm seeing because I haven't brought my glasses, but it's important for us to think about this link we have to others. So the prefix inter talks about the relationship between people, but there's an important fact here. If we're going to create a relationship with other people or an intercultural dialogue, then this has to be not just a question of recognizing the cultures, it also has to recognize that many of these cultures have been silenced and basically subjugated, and that we don't have equality in our societies. So this is a painting here from Antonio Berni, who's an Argentinian painter from a rural school from 1956. And it makes us think about these three questions. How can we define relevant knowledge that needs to be taught in schools? Who decides on that? Who decides that, rather? Curricula is something that has been disputed politically and pedagogically. So who decides what the content of a curriculum is? Who goes into those schools? Who's allowed to study there and who can't study there? And what content can contribute to construct a Latin America that's more democratic and equal? And we saw a continuity of systems in schools which were very monocultural. Only one culture dominated. So we don't have interculturality if there's only one culture being imposed. But if through education systems we also end up repeating these hierarchies that happen in society, then we're going to legitimize privileges and hegemonies of certain parts of society, and it also creates racism. And through these educational systems, these inequalities, which are racial and also ethnic, will become ever more enrooted. So we have to confront this epistemic racism, because in the same way that we have hierarchies between people, we also have hierarchy in terms of knowledge and the knowledge that's produced by these people. And this hierarchy ends up worsening inequality, and it explains the reason why there are so few black researchers and teachers in schools, and who can't get to higher education, can't access higher education. So here we have a key for the construction of an intercultural curriculum and anti-racist curriculum. I always say that anti-racism has to go hand in hand with interculturality, and we need to break these normal patterns of behavior, such as making these people invisible, silencing them. And we need to make this knowledge and from black and indigenous people, and women as well, more visible. So that people don't carry on thinking that our people have never contributed to our culture because of racism and because of all these inequalities. And that ends up configuring our subjectivity, because we were silenced in this way. It ends up affecting our own subjective view of society. So we need to question the role and the place of these cultures. So we need to break down this hegemony of Eurocentric discussions and curriculums rather, in schools. So it's very important as well, when looking at this, to recover these thinkers and intellectuals who are black, who are so important in combating racism in schools and this epistemic racism. And this is also a vital tool in this fight, which the Congress has talked about, which is awakening people's awareness. I thought this title is incredibly powerful because all these different types of awareness have been put to sleep because of racism and this Eurocentric hegemony within our curriculums. It's also a very difficult moment in Latin America where fundamentalist and conservative political parties have much more visibility. So we need to awaken our different types of awareness to emancipate ourselves. And interculturality needs to also be present where politics and policies are. We need to act and we need to be able to intervene in these areas. And we need to have it within this struggle and fight to be able to decolonize our minds, which is exactly what an African thinker said, Ngugi wa Thiong. We need to think about not just economic domination, but cultural domination. I'm going to read a little piece of text here from him. So, colonizers make the people who are colonized believe that their land is empty, and they want to distance them from these lands. And it makes them, tries to make them identify with things that are much further away from them. So you try and dislodge these people from their past, from their history. And that is what epistemic racism is about. And it's in operation within culture and education. And structural racism is exactly behind all this, to maintain these structures and keep the privileges for just a few people. So just to finish off here, we need not just intercultural curriculums, but also interculture. Oh, I'm just going to have a glass of water. Am I speaking very quickly? Are you managing to understand me? I can't speak Portuñol, but I'm trying to speak in a way that everybody can understand. So we need to advance an anti-racist and intercultural curriculum to include and legitimize other voices which have been absent, but not just black voices, but also indigenous ones, and from sexual diversity, and from different genders, and work for epistemic justice. And that means joining together with other epistemologies, because there are other ways of seeing the world. So I believe we need to work in these 4 different areas. So we need to have an impact on practices, on materiality too. What do I mean by this? Quite often, the material that we use reproduce colonial iconography. We've already talked about this, and we need to change that. We need to also think about the names of spaces and buildings institutions have. We were talking about Maria Filipa School yesterday, and these ideas are decolonizing ideas, because we need to be able to intervene in these spaces. From the way research is carried out, it has to be committed with other types of learning to help emancipate society. It's not got to be we don't want just research which is aimed at creating articles that are published and help further the careers of academics. It has to be research that has an impact on the world and on policies as well, because we're not talking about just macro policies, but micro policies, such as this particular Congress. By awakening awareness, it's an emancipating act, and we need that. So we need to recover the plurality of voices that have been silenced, also representation, new types of epistemologies. We need to be epistemically vigilant to help emancipate our people. So I'm going to end with this phrase here, which is from Enrique Dulce. It's not simply a case of creating a new home for those who've been excluded from the old house. It needs to be a new house with a new way of distributing that space. If not, indigenous people, women, and Afro-descendants will end up carrying on occupying the service rooms as they always have. So we need to construct a curriculum, intercultural curriculum, but we need to reform the whole of the house, all the different types of injustices against trans people, the LGBTQI community. This is what Audre Lorde said. All these people are important to be able to reconstruct this home. So thank you very much for inviting me to participate. And thank you to the panelists.
I'm sorry about my cough. Okay, so I guess now we can go to the questions and answers session. Well, I think we've got time for 3 questions. I would like the $1 million questions, please. Good afternoon. Actually, I don't really have a question. Alicia, I attended the mini course with her in the pre-conference event, and she made a comment because she established a relationship between inclusion and a specific symbol that I would like her to show here today. I would like her to repeat what she said that day, because I think it includes everything that we talked about inclusion today, both this morning and this afternoon. Alicia, it's basically the story about the box. Could you repeat that story here? The story about the little box? Sure. So the idea is that we create these little worlds, these small units of reciprocity. And these little worlds shouldn't be little boxes. They shouldn't be little boxes where we include people. Based on my story, you know, it's very important to me share my story with other children. So, you know, we would play with each other, we would tell each other stories. And afterwards, when I had classes with deaf children and blind children, and I had art classes with them, I understood that these children could not be put into these little boxes.
que o sistema educativo faz.
These are the boxes that the educational system creates. So I thought that we actually had to remove the sides of these little boxes. And we had to create the natural interaction between people. Now, obviously, there's a lot to be done to implement this. But basically, there's no one single answer. And I think that's also a solution to end wars. The other day, I was seeing this girl from in a movie, and basically this girl, if she had a desire to have a good life, but it's more than just about well-being. It's about being whole and living in one's community. And this should be done individually or as part of a family, however that family is constituted. And you should have the freedom to be whoever you want. And nobody should be put in other people's places. So that's the idea. It's removing barriers so that we can share. That's what I try to implement in my classes. And that's what I would like other people to do as well. Good afternoon. My name is Alessandra. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. You all made really great contributions to this topic. So I would like to ask 3 questions, or rather 1 question to each one of you. So I will start with Aliã. So you mentioned a school that addresses this multilingual issue. And basically, I want to understand how you see this language issue and indigenous culture. That is, how can we include this in our educational context and in schools in Brazil? So how can we bring all of these issues to the classroom? That is, the issues of indigenous culture and language. Because it's important for us to understand indigenous language and the resistance of the indigenous people. So I would like you to talk a little bit more about this. Thank you for your question. So I'm a teacher. I am trained in the visual arts. And working with indigenous art has been a challenge. Let's remind ourselves that the whole of Brazil is indigenous territory. And there are a lot of words here that nobody was able to erase, such as Tijuca, Jacarepaguá, Mauá. All of these are Tupi-Guarani words. And they strengthen the people who were here first. Now, I always emphasize this idea that we, the indigenous people, have always been here. And today, in the whole world, they try to erase us. And people have always tried to erase us. But it's by means of education and culture and intercultural sensitivity that we exist and resist today. We don't want to impose our language in the minds and languages of people. We're just here to show you that there's yet another language and another culture that needs to be respected. So how do we work with indigenous culture, indigenous language, and indigenous symbols? What we call cosmovision. How do we insert that in the classroom? Well, we can bring indigenous representatives. and we can bring our indigenous way of thinking. So the school where we work today, both in our collaborative network and in the Sesc network, and I've been invited, to go around Brazil to talk about this possibility and how we can contribute and learn from other teachers. And we've been doing this through the use of indigenous languages. In my case, the Tupi-Guarani language. And we try to implement this by means of our activities. So, for example, stomping your left foot on the ground means feeling the environment. My grandmother used to say that we connect to the soil and to the constellations. We are a people of the constellations and the soil. We will rest under a tree, but our ancestry shines in the stars. Now, how can you propose such as an ancestral culture in a technological school? Well, we do that through what moves us, through sensations and emotions, through artistic interventions. But we're not imposing. We don't do this through imposition. We create possibilities. So the children in indigenous schools, they understand that the soil is sacred. And that's why they create markings on the ground. There's a day where, these children need to feel the earth and they need to get dirty. That's sacred. We don't impose our songs. We start singing, and these children will sing with us based on what they're feeling. We don't impose our paintings on others. We will say that this painting is ancestral, that it's a guardian of the feminine ancestry. We don't use paper headdresses. Our idea is that our tiara is a protection of the mind, because we're minds, emotions, and spirits. So it's like what you said. These children don't need to be within a little small box, because these children are moving through different spaces. That's why we say our school is different. We want to value and we want to question culture. We don't have Xuxa song saying that the indigenous people are noisy people. No, our songs are sacred. And what comes out of our mouth is an evocation. It's a way of thanking the deities. It's what we call Inyanderu, basically something that allows us to feel with our hearts, something that allows us to reflect about things and to do good deeds. And that's why I look at the floor, because we believe in an area without evil. That's why our colleagues talk about anti-racism, because on the outside we're different. There's one thing that links all of us, and that's the heart, or beating hearts. And that's why we have the drums and the sacred maracá. There's the sound of seeds involving water. So that's what our school is about. That's what we teach. We don't distance human beings from humans and from nature and the other animals, because we're air, we're soil, we're fire, and we're water.
Obrigada, professora.
Thank you, Professor.
Queria também perguntar para a Anny.
I would also like to ask Anny a question.
Sim, Anny, tudo bem?
Is that possible?
Você falou sobre o currículo.
So you talked about the curriculum and the anti-racist curriculum. So I was thinking about the anti-racist curriculum within our schools, but even in universities. We've got with us a group that's graduating and they will become teachers.
através dessa formação
So
docente
how
nas universidades,
do we
trazer
include
esse
this in
currículo
our
de
teacher
racismo
training? How do we
em
insert
todas as
this
áreas do
anti-racist
conhecimento, né?
curriculum
Então eu queria ouvir
in, and how do we insert this into all our areas of knowledge? Can you tell us what you think about this and tell us how you think we could engage with this topic when it comes to teacher training?
Muito obrigada por la pregunta.
Thank you for the question.
Sí, el currículo también. Estoy pensando en el ensino
Yes.
superior, como você falava. Ahí también temos
Now, I'm
muitas
thinking about
outras
higher
experiências
education when it comes to this
que
curriculum.
avançam também nisto.
And we don't have a lot of experience with that, but there's some things that are happening.
E também
For example, there's a lot of silencing of African history.
de que não produziram nada.
And it's not just the silencing. There's this idea that Africans didn't produce anything. So we have to create policies that try to change this idea. There are a lot of experiences related to this in Brazil. And some of these, basically, they're creating professorships and recovering the names of Brazilian, African women who are thinkers and teachers and philosophers. And we're trying to deal with epistemic racism, and we're bringing a lot of black voices to the table because there is a black intellectualism that we need to make use of. There's this whole talk about decolonization and decolonial thinking. But a lot of this, and a lot of these ideas came from black Caribbean writers from the 40s. So I think we need to revisit these thinkers and writers. Anny was an anthropologist from the 40s. And he wrote about the equality of all races. But he's unknown to most people. And now I'm thinking about a Colombian thinker, Colombo Garcia, who talks about the importance of working outside the home. This is a very important concept in its epistemic mission. I think we need to recover this tradition and we need to use it in practice. That's why I always say that it's not enough to just define a policy. We need to put that policy into practice. And research needs to be geared towards that. Or curricula need to have these feminine voices, and they need to bring us the history of African women, because these women were made even more invisible, and there's not a lot of research regarding that. So this is something that we need to recover. And again, it's not enough to be anti-racist. We also have to not be homophobic. We also need to not be sexist. We need to link and bring all of these struggles together, because we have a whole matrix of inequality that has an influence in the epistemic field. So we need to bring all these struggles together.
E a última, gente, juro. Alicia,
Alicia,
quando a gente está aqui, né, no congresso,
when we're here
falando sobre
at the
educação
Congress
antirracista,
talking about anti-racism, anti-ableism, we're also talking about reciprocal education. So I wanted you to maybe talk to us a little bit about this issue. We're talking about reciprocal, are we talking about reciprocal education when we're talking about anti-racism and anti-ableism? I think well, that's what we're trying to aim for. Yes, that's why we're here. But we need to be able to pass these ideas on to students, because all these students who are here have other teachers who are not here. But you have some power here. You can go and demand that your teachers include different views. in the same way that we can offer to our students different experiences and different points of view. So what I discovered when I was studying history of art is that art has the sensitivity to transmit symbolism and representations that every culture has contributed. And that's why I did this and not anthropology, because at the moment, also at university, anthropology was very paternalistic. Indigenous people were a subject to be studied, an object rather to be studied. They were invisibilized in many ways. The black people were not even taken into account. So we need to these questions, and these days we need to ask them every single day. I remember a friend of mine who's a white man, a scientist. He is very highly esteemed. I learned a lot from him. But he said to me something. He said, "You're looking at when you look at a history book, and when you about science, that is, but when you look at this, you find out that when somebody discovers something, and another person, but when you find out, when you know that there is somebody who is not named, is referenced as being the inventor or discoverer of something, if they haven't got a name, it's no doubt because they're either a woman or an indigenous person. So when we start looking at this and questioning this, that's when we're going to start breaking down these old systems. So when you want to research something, or because
o professor, que também é sagrado, certo? Que sabe-lo todo. E o conteúdo, que é como a palavra de Cristo, com todo respeito.
So when we think about
toda, mas acho que vou graficar para que a gente compreenda, né? Mas o processo que acontece na vida de uma
the
pessoa,
process that happens within a person's life,
quando tem 18 anos,
when you're 18 years old and you don't know what you're going to do with your life and what you want to be, 4 years later, you suddenly become a professional. The world changes completely. Their world changes. It's only 4 years or 5 years. And nobody looks at that process about what happened with that person. How much information they've got in their heads, because the information you can find out on your cell phone. You don't need it in your head. You need to be able to research and adapt and dialogue and hold dialogues. Look and ask. Content is not so relevant. We think that as teachers, we need to be able to have lots of knowledge. But really, we have like shifting sands within our heads with lots of questions. Because research is not good when you've got all the answers. Research is good when you've got a huge load of questions, whether they're good ones or bad ones. So this is the only way for us to really break down the walls of this box and to make the difference and a collective construction of knowledge.
menos. Que é pior que quebrar. Acho que é como quebrar aqueles eslavones, não sei como chamam em português, eslavones das cadenas dos escravos, né?
It's like breaking the chains of slavery. So we need to basically remove the weight, as it were, from the ballast from the ships. We need to do it together. If not, we're going to carry on reproducing the same world. With all due respect, the shit world that we have constructed here. But we're looking to do exactly that here. We should bring the coffee here. Have our coffee here.
Por mim eu ficaria, para mim tô no local de luxo, tô aqui, ó, onde eu tô, observando vocês.
It's difficult. We can't hear the questions from the speakers, but Marcelo now is thanking them for all their sharing, generosity, and being absolutely honest. I would love it if we could have our coffee here and carry on. Yeah, it would be breaking out of the box once again by doing the same. But it says time is up. Yeah, I can see what she's holding up here. But before that, I'd just like to give you some messages. I'd like you to register with the QR code that's on the screen. Then when you leave, can you please put back the headphones and transmitters? So let's have our coffee and then we'll come back in 15 minutes because it's great being here with you. So let's hurry.
Olá, pessoas. Boa tarde, boa tarde.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
A animação tá ótima. Eu tenho duas notícias.
I've got two pieces of news for you. One's good and one's bad.
Que estamos chegando ao fim.
The bad news is we're almost at the end.
Mas a boa é que ainda não será agora.
But the good news is we haven't finished yet.
Bom, agora vamos vamos ter uma palestra.
We're now going to have a virtual talk called 68 Voices, 68 Hearts. It's a project that promotes pride for original communities and their languages. And the director of the Design and Graphic Department of the Ibero-America University, Gabriela Badillo.
Hola, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias a todos.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much, everyone.
¿Podemos poner la presentación, por favor? Muchas gracias.
Can we show the presentation, please? So 68 Voices and 68 Hearts is a project that we've been working on for 10 years about original tales narrated in the original languages by 68 different indigenous ethnic groups in Mexico. And this project emerged because of certain circumstances, but one issue that was very important for us is a poem by Miguel León Portilla, who's a very important writer in Mexico. He wrote in Spanish, and he said that when a language dies, a window on a door closes, and a way of living that's different here on Earth. And this poem symbolizes very much what we're trying to do with this project, which is to show that these 68 different linguistic groups in Mexico, because we have 300 different languages in 68 different language groups, but lots of people don't even know this, don't know the wealth of language in Mexico, and that happens all over the world. That's why this project is based on the premise that nobody can love what they don't know. Because when we don't know something, how can we take care of it or love it? And that's why this is so important. We need to know this wealth and this connection with traditional stories and wisdom. And that's so that people who aren't part of an original group of people can get to know this wealth of information and also diminish discrimination. So now I'm going to show you the first tale, the first story, because it was the first one that we did here in this project by Miguel León Portilla.
Queja no pa wey al, wano pa atentini, no chitlamante te cuanime,
The interpreters aren't getting the Portuguese translation, so we can't translate this part. So this initiative So on the one hand, this production was done by a part of the population that doesn't know all this wealth, but also by original inhabitants to help gain respect and make visible these communities and their languages and strengthen the links between the older people in these communities and their children. They're the adults are the holders of this information and this knowledge. And it's important that children learn this because it will sensitize them to being able to, for them to want to carry on using their original language. So we want to strengthen these traditions, and it's really important because if not, there will be lots of windows closing, and from these more than 300 languages as part of these 68 different language groups, because a lot of them are going extinct, and it won't be possible to share them anymore if they do. So we believe that to have a better future, we need to value our past. We need to recognize ancestral values and culture. We need to recognize and value the clothes as well. If you want to if we want a better future. So we have to assess lots of things as humans, in humanity. It's a critical moment for us to look, reflect on the past and see what we can improve thanks to these different communities. So now I'm going to show two stories from the community Ixcateco, which is in Oaxaca. And the second story will be from the Antois language to show the traditions of these two cultures and help give a magical explanation through the characters who refer to the mountains. So let's see those now.
Kukamihima chica chatmishhe. Gutri sa chatmishhe shula la gutse tunduma ku kwayema.
Chasmishela jeje chase chinyashi.
La cuatu que más ram.
Cuatu bechu emalakuaje.
Cuatu que emandeje.
The interpreters are not receiving the translated audio from the indigenous language, so we cannot interpret into English.
Y ponemos el que sigue, por favor, también.
And now the second video, please.
El que sigue. Ese, gracias.
Makanjicha an lakakawin is dahon lakatam shwakene sawal kuse isbalakchene. Mamash humbotun shahamachalkat is humbotun tachi an leo. Lakatam wilchan is dahun lakatam shachan hakuklili an lakatam mus. Wat lakshne is lakpus dahon an shwakene.
The interpreters are not receiving the translated audio from the indigenous language, and so they cannot interpret into English.
Ahunili katamaka istokli an shachan hakuklili an ish akatankehu. An atzoko kaana laksine an shwakene chiakshni wani chaminta katalakadalmayach lakakuklil chucha ta istul maski sawalstak pashle antulakapatahul wachawaich chuncha istanahon ashalak makanin.
Estos son tan solo ejemplos de lo rico de las tradiciones, lo rico de las historias.
So, those were two examples of the wealth of the history and the traditions of these indigenous cultures. But there are even more examples. There's a lot of knowledge there that we can rescue and value by listening to them. And I think we can value it by amplifying and sharing these tales. So I think we should decelerate, breathe, and think about everything that we've done and think about what we should stop doing. We have to think about what we should pay attention to. Because there are a lot of things that were not well done. There were not a lot of things that were done to these communities. And I think we need to be fair if we want to have a better future and make progress. We believe in the original language as the tip of the iceberg. But every culture and every community has its own world. They have a different cosmovision. And through our project and through our work, all these years that we were there with them, we learned a lot. There are these children who we like to pay attention to. We teach them how to play, how to dream, and how to read in their own language. And we help them to generate content in their own language so that they may understand that their language is valid and that it is contemporary and that they can use it today. We have to relearn. We need to learn based on everything that we've been taught, and we have to think about the link with nature and death. All of this learning was very important to all of us who were working with this project. There were all of these issues with death and nature in the cultures of these original inhabitants. So I think it provides us a new way to reconnect with nature and death. This project tries to instill pride in relation to our indigenous cultures and our First Nations. Recognizing that we had these First Nations allows us to understand that these people have rights because they were here first. This is something that was implemented in Canada and that worked. We're not expecting we're not expecting government to confer rights to these people. It's a matter of understanding that these people are already here and that they have rights. They already had rights. And we have to be aware of all of the diversity that we have. If we want to make progress, we have to embrace all of this diversity. So this project shouldn't be done in an isolated fashion. The revitalization of the language and the traditions and the culture of these communities and the valuing of this knowledge needs to come from the inside. It needs to come from these traditional inhabitants. But this has been done together with others, with those in school, with agents from the community, and that's it. Thank you.
Gabriela.
Sí, te escucho.
¿Me escucha?
Gabriela, can you hear us? So thank you, and now I'm going to be speaking in Portuguese to talk about what you just said. Okay, so guys, good afternoon. I hope you were able to understand what was talked about. 68 Voices was a project that I got to know about when I was doing my specialization. And I thought it was interesting because Gabriela is from Mexico and this work also comes from Mexico. And there's this... we have these languages that are going extinct, that are disappearing, and they're putting in a lot of effort to make sure that these languages continue to exist. Not only these languages, but all of the knowledge associated to these languages. That is, all of the culture that's linked to these languages. And what called my attention was the fact that this project is based on a sentence, which is, how do you love what you don't know, what you've never heard of? So for us to be able to love, for us to be able to understand and listen, we need to know something. Remember when she was talking about accelerating or decelerating and stopping to listen to these voices? That's important because we're talking about voices and people and territories and cultures that were made visible through their language. And when these languages die, all of these other things associated with language end up disappearing as well. So all of those videos get these stories from these people. So these people tell stories in their own languages, such as Quechua and Ashakwa. And we have actually 68 languages in this project. 68 languages being spoken by their native speakers, people who belong to those different cultures. Because we can't do anything without these people, without their languages. So all of that knowledge, all of the knowledge is represented in those videos, which tell the stories of those peoples. And those stories are recounted by are told by the people of those villages and those peoples. So now we would like to know whether anyone has any questions for Gabriela. Good afternoon. So first of all, I would like to congratulate you for the beauty of your work. And so all of this is being done based on those who actually produce this culture. So I think this work is kind of, it's giving new meaning to all of this. Because without these languages, these cultures end up dying. So I'd like to ask you two questions. One question about the illustrations. Who is responsible for the illustrations? Were you the one who did the drawings and the film? And are there any stories told by children? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Disculpen si hablé muy rápido, la verdad es que como sabía que teníamos el tiempo contado para la presentación.
So I'm sorry if I spoke too quickly. I know that we don't have a lot of time and there's a lot to say, but this is a project that's done together with people from the community. It's not just done for the community. So it was a collaborative project, and that's very important. This was a very personal project to me, and it was made possible by means of a scholarship. We were able to get to know these cultures through the Institute of Indigenous Languages of Mexico. It was through them that we accessed these communities, and it was through them that we were able to talk to these people and get to know their stories. So they were the ones who created the drawings. And it was incredible to see those characters and their colors, and all of that inspired us. For us, this new meaning is very important. That is, giving new meaning to things through art. These are contemporary cultures. We're not talking about old static cultures. These are cultures which are moving and changing. So we are a collaborative team, and with each tale that's told, we have a curatorship that selects what stories will be included, and this curatorship tries to ensure that everybody's voice can be included. And basically each tale has a different aesthetic because the cultures are different. And that's the idea. We want to show diversity through those illustrations. So obviously I couldn't be responsible for everything, but basically I wanted to give everyone a voice, to show the differences that unite us. So regarding your question about whether we have stories being told by children, no, we don't. We wanted to give adults a voice, because the elders, it's the older adults and the elders that have all that knowledge. The children, they understand, they have an idea, but sometimes they don't speak the language. So these people end up feeling devalued because nobody asked them about their culture and their languages. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to give the elders a voice. We wanted to give them the microphone so they could communicate and tell their stories and their traditions.
Alguma pergunta? Alguém gostaria? Oi? Ah, sim.
So where is this material available in case we want to access it? Well, this is a non-profit project. It's so it's available on 68voices.mx or voices.mx, and it's also available on YouTube. We are making we're changing the website a little bit. We're adding subtitles because that's something that was requested of us. And basically people want to be able to see the subtitles in lots of different languages. So we have some of the tales with subtitles in Portuguese even. Okay, so thank you for sharing your incredible project with us. So congratulations to you and your team. And thank you very much. Well, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for your interest. So, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gabriela. So let's bring things to a close now. So to do that, we're going to invite someone here for an artistic presentation. We're going to invite a singer who has been working for 13 years with Black voices and the power of Black voices. So please welcome to the stage Anna Limeta.
Boa tarde.
Good afternoon. When I infiltrated literature, I only wanted to have adventures, and my soul was full. When I began to publish my work, I managed to fulfill my wishes. What joy! Other books circulate, other emotions, and I thought I really need to publish my work. First of all, I gained admiration because finally a writer from the favelas had emerged called Carolina de Jesus. It left society shocked. First of all, I was confused. People wanted me to talk, people wanted me with them, but then they began to become jealous of me. They said, you should give your wealth to a care home. And high society women said, you have to be charitable, give things to the poor, clothes. But high society, don't give to charity. And so I became disillusioned. And my ideals began vanishing. And my body getting older, becoming more wrinkled. And dying. The conditions of poor people are very sad here on earth. They have to go to war, while rich people live in peace. Rich people always come first, poor people last. Rich people make war, poor people don't know why. Poor people only can think of rice and beans. Poor people aren't involved in business in the nation. Poor and rich people win the battles, but it's only the rich who get medals. And their names are the ones that make the headlines. Poor people and rich people are injured by war. But poor people are never promoted, while rich people are. They get to become the leaders. The paper which I had to pick up became the books that I read. So many things that I wanted to do. But I suffered because of prejudice. I want to be reborn in a country led by black people. Goodbye. I'm going to die. And I'll leave you these verses. Leave my country these verses. Do we have the right to be reborn? If so, I want to be born in a place where black people are happy. Can I come live here, Sesc? Can I stay here waiting for the 5th Congress? Sad, but unfortunately we always come to the end. We've learnt a lot in the last 3 days, all been very relevant, but before we close, I'd like the education manager, Adriana Santos, to come here and say a few words. Thank you, Marcelo. Can you hear me? So, we've had 3 days of lots of debates about relevant subjects, and we're not going to stop here. This was the start of a conversation, and it's a movement for us to move forward. There are lots of laws and initiatives, but what we really need is to make a difference. I'm always very touched when people talk about school, because school for me, I'm not just going to talk about schools because we have lots of different initiatives in education, but schools are what create diversity and democracy, and we have the power to transform. It might not be in the hands of teachers, but it's in the hands of the communities that are there, and they need protagonists there, and the presence there, and the voices and participation of children who are part of that day-to-day life. And remembering what our president said in the opening, to be able to start any journey, we need to take a step. So, in schools, we make lots of steps, or take lots of steps forward. So I'm very proud to have worked with this team. So please give them a round of applause. And I feel very thankful and happy to work here. I've been working here for 32 years. I feel honored. It's a place of transformation. It's a very powerful place to help us reach different communities and people and understanding. And here at this Congress, when we were choosing the subjects to mobilize, our idea was for people to be here, present, widening their perspectives and exchanging ideas, because we never succeed in doing anything alone. So this isn't the end, it's the beginning of many things. And I'm going to invite you already for the 5th edition of this International Conference on Education. It'll be from the 23rd to the 25th of October. So I hope you'll be here. Marcelo, thank you so much. You're, of course, invited to the next one, too. And we're going to end here. Congratulations, Adriana. And I'd like to thank the whole of the team here at Sesc Rio. talking about Priscilla, Adriana, Bernardo, Alessandra. Those are the people who I dealt with most and have really welcomed me here in the best possible way and have helped me to carry out the work the way that I like to carry it out. And when we come to the end, we like to thank Analu as well. Analu, wow. What on earth was that? Come here, please, and help us close this. Analu? What are you doing at the moment? So I've just finished a concert with Disney, and it was in Sao Paulo and Rio, and I'm now going to start rehearsing for another play that will open in January. Thank you, and congratulations once again. There wouldn't be a better way for us to end this conference than with you. Analu Pimenta, at Analu Pimenta is where you can find me. Thank you to everybody who was following us online, and for those of you who were here in person during this amazing journey of awakening awareness. Let's hope that in 2024 we have the opportunity to share what we've learned here and be able to learn new experiences and have new debates and going even deeper into what we started here. So thank you once again for your presence, for your company. Please follow us online, on social media. We've got 5 programs in Sesc for us to improve the quality of our lives and our well-being. Oh, and should we have a photo? Yep. Please come here to the stage. Thank you. Goodbye.